Yo, what's up, boys and girls? I'm Swolelax, and I'm back at it again with a video. Something over today. We're going to be going over part 2 of our Yu-Gi-Oh! March 2020 tier list. Now, we are going to be going over the best decks of this format. That's right, the high tiers and the top tiers. Last video, if you guys have not seen it, which I highly recommend you do, links will be in the description down below. We have mid-tier, low-tier, and table 500. Quick recap if you guys did not watch that one, which I still recommend you do. We have Orcus, some Warrior Goop. We have Sky Strikers, Trickstar, Thunder Dragons, Dark Magician. Nothing special. Mid-tiers, we have some pure variants like Invoked and also Mech Knights. Some control decks like Guru Control and Totally Awesome Frogs. In addition to that, we also got our Magical Muskets and our resident favorite, Cyber Dragons. Now, sad to say the mid tier, but moving on, the high tier and the top tier are the best decks of this format. And we have about 11 decks that we're going to be talking about, splitting them up between the high and top tier. I'm very excited. It's a very diverse meta. And I'm really pumped to not only play in this current format, but also see what we can do before the new Master Roll coming around a month from now. But if you guys like this video, make sure to leave a like if you want some more. Please subscribe to my videos coming in the pipeline. Stay tuned to that if you want to. And let me know in the comment section down below if you guys want to know what was inside of the burrito I ate before recording this video. It was very delicious, and oh man, I'm probably going to make another one sometime soon. Anyways, on to the high tier and top tier. We're going to start off with the high tiers. Now, it's going to be really hard to kind of differentiate some of the high tiers and top tiers because you still will probably see a lot of the high tiers at the top table just because they can be played at such a top level. But I feel like the difference this time, whereas other times it was a little more obvious what was top tier in the meta. For example, when we had the triad of Sky Strikers, Thunder Dragons, and Salamangreats, that was pretty obvious on what the best decks of the format are. And in this case, we still have some decks that are pretty prominently the best decks of the format, but there's a lot more of them, which is really great. So in the high tier, let's go ahead and start there. I'm actually going to be putting Salamangreats and Burning Abyss. Now, these two decks are two graveyard-centric decks, which, you know, a lot of these decks actually even in the top tier and high tier are. However, I do feel like Salamangreats and Burning Abyss are two of the decks that have been around for just a little while now. Obviously, Burning Abyss has been around longer. And I feel like for these two decks in specific, they're kind of taken a different direction from their initial inception. Now, Salamangreats obviously deviate the least from their initial inception, but Burning Abyss is really interesting to me because right now they're playing the Block Dragon Turbo. A lot of the other Gemini FDK and a few of the decks are also playing that as well. But with this deck in particular, you're able to go into so many level 3 extenders. You're also able to go into things like Cherubini, Saryuja, and then you have Block Dragon, which is a pretty powerful main deck boss monster, in addition to having access to things like Dante, some popping removal cards, and the Burning Abyss cards to graveyard. A lot of recursion of value as well. In addition to that, they don't really need a lot to get going. They can run the Danger Engine, very solid deck, can play through a lot of hand traps, really fun to play and really fun to play against. Actually, a lot of really cool interactions you can do. Now, however, unlike and similar to some of the mid tiers, why a little bit lower on the list, it can get stopped pretty easily by things like Nibiru, also things like Dark Ruler and more. So there is some things here this deck could definitely work on, but it does have a lot of really good options to it. You can run a more aggressive variant, a more stun variant. Overall, very solid use of the engine, and also pretty fun deck as well. And cool Dante forever. Next, we're going to go on to Salamangreats. Salamangreats, I think, are respectively high tier in this one. They're not necessarily the beasts that they once were, obviously with consistency hits to things like Circle and Gazelle, which in my personal opinion, Circle probably should be at 2, maybe even 3. But the deck does enough, and the deck also just does normal Salamangreat things. Nothing truly special, which is really funny. I mean, everyone kind of knows the basic Salamangreat plays right now, and the funny part to me, at least, the interesting part, rather, is that this deck still has so much to offer, has a lot to offer in terms of value. So, essentially, want to get the ball rolling, just like any other control deck, where they're a snowball deck. Once that snowball starts to get going and starts to roll fast, this deck can go from 0 to 100 really quick. You can clear their entire board, have like 2 cards in hand, and then boom, next thing you know, they got a Boral Sword on board, and you're like, oh my god, like what just happened? So there's a lot of really interesting things with this deck that I think can still be play at the top level and play at the high levels, but they do get stopped by things like Abyss Dweller, which we're starting to see a lot of places. In addition to that, they do have a pretty rough time going second sometimes, just because a lot of people are leaning away from the OTK variants. But they still have a lot of really good options. So I don't know. High tier, I think, is a really good place to have Salamangreats at the moment. Next, we're going to go on to the next high tier. I actually am going to put 2 decks at the same time right now. Again, that's going to be Infernoids. I actually think I'm going to go put a little bit below Salamangreats. And, I'm really tempted to put Lunalights in this, but I think Lunalights might just be top tier. I don't know. Who knows? Anyways, I think we're just going to talk about Infernoids for the moment. So Infernoids are a really good deck right now because I feel like this deck is pretty slept on. Like some of the decks inside the high tier and even some of the decks in the mid tier, this deck doesn't really see a whole lot of play. In fact, that you might be seeing it popping up a little more often because of the recent YCS top, and in addition to that, you might see it as well because it does have a lot of really cool banishing effects. Essentially, the deck is full of DD Crows, and whenever the DD Crow is essentially main decked inside the meta, and it's really good against some of the best decks right now. And Infernoids is a nice tech choice. They have a lot of really powerful monsters, and hey, a lot of non-once return effects. In addition to that, the Layer of Darkness, specifically the Layer of Darkness engine, is really good because you're able to tribute off your opponent's monsters to banish cards and also activate their various effects, which I think is very useful. And on top of all that, you can also activate their insane fusion spell cards, which allow them to banish things from, like, I think from their deck. Like, essentially, they just have their own Shaddoll fusions in themselves, which, if that's any indication of what the meta is currently like, that's pretty good. So I personally like that a lot. Void Feast is also a pretty insane card. The Decatron's super solid as well for a few negations on board. So very underrated deck, I think, this format, and high tier comfortably for sure. Anyways, okay, let's go on to the next one. I think we're going to do You know, I actually want to put Gran Maju OTK in the high tier ranks. So I personally believe that this deck is crazy. So for a few different reasons, I think it's actually a solid high tier deck because not only can it main deck going second cards without fear, like Super Polymerization, Nibiru, Dark Ruler no more, easy side deck options, Dimension Shifter even if it really wanted to. The deck just is very, very consistent for like, a sad reason too. Like, essentially, or not necessarily even relying on the Gran Maju to OTK, but you can run so many engines with it to help really establish your board and maintain control outside of whenever you break your opponent's board. After that, too, you don't really mind going second, and if you're going first, well, yeah, you can use that Super Poly or Crackdown. You can use a lot of different resources at your disposal to essentially litigate the fact that you only really are using one or two cards as a major boss monster. Gran Maju for cards that are banished, and also, what's it called? Eater of Millions. That's a really good spell removal card that not a lot of people can out. In addition to that, too, like I just said, you have a lot of cards like Super Polymerization and even Crackdown, Solemn Strike, Solemn Warnings, that you can use as more of a floodgate style if you're choosing to go first, or if your opponent makes you go first, which most of the time they will. Now, I feel like this deck does get stopped by things like Lancia. Obviously, that's a pretty big hindrance. One Infinite Permanence will essentially destroy the Gran Maju, but this deck does have a lot of rank 8s at its disposal, and running the Danger Engine can help clear boards in addition to having big bodies on the field. This deck is pretty fun. I love seeing it played, and it's just a solid, pretty straightforward deck. You'll probably see this one at regionals more often. We actually had some of YCS Utrecht, I believe, also made into some of the higher tables. Really fun to watch, and pretty skillful sometimes too. So I think this gets a pretty solid high tier from me. Next, we're going on to the next high tier deck, and I think that's going to be solidly Lunalights. I don't necessarily think Lunalights is top tier. I know this is going to be a kind of a shocking one, and the rest of the decks you'll see right here are going to be in the top tier. Now, Lunalights probably is the best of the high tiers because they are teetering on that top tier board, but unlike the other top tiers, they get stopped pretty easily by some of the basic hand traps in the game. Now and once return effects are really cool. Yes, access to Abyss Dweller is really cool, and a lot of just random effects, they can just cycle through all of them. But this deck is pretty weak sometimes, and in addition to that, if you don't really end on the right board, or if you're stopped pretty early in your combo, man, this deck just does not hold up very well. So, that might be a controversial opinion, but it is the correct one. Next, moving on, we're going to go on to the top tiers. Lunalights being the best one, so high tiers again, we have Lunalights, Gran Maju OTK, Salamangreats, Infernoids, and Burning Abyss. Next on to the top tiers, we're going to start from the bottom to the top. We're going to talk about these 5 decks that are the best decks inside of the game. Okay, so starting off, we have Dinosaurs. Dinosaurs, I'm going to put the top tiers. Now, obviously, the Dino decks did take YCS Las Vegas, manned by Scott Page and his team. Very good job to them. That's just really fun watching them play. So, I feel like Dinosaurs right now are in a really weird position because on one hand, the True King variant is probably definitively the best one, but they also have access to the Lost World variant too, which is very helpful, including the fact that a lot of things are targeting nowadays, so that token does hinder your opponent quite a bit. In addition to that, yes, this deck does get stopped sometimes by Ash Blossom and a few other small hand traps too. But if you're able to get to your pieces like Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, which, hello, Book of Moon for everything that also does burn damage, and also a non-targeting, non-destruction effect to send monsters to the graveyard, and in addition to that, can also help you set up plays with things like Giant Rex and Volzar, man, that's crazy. I stand by that Ultimate Conductor Tyranno is one of the best boss monsters ever printed inside the game. Also, utilizing it at your disposal, you can use things like Pot of Extravagance to dig deeper inside your cards. You can main deck things like Lightning Storm. This deck does really good going first and going second, so I think top tier solid is probably where I'm going to put that at. Next, we're going to go on to the separate pick of this deck. I'm going to be picking Altergeist for my number 4 slot as terms of the best decks, or sorry, number 5 slot of the best decks of the format. So solid top tier for Altergeist. It's a deck that we've been seeing to play in and out of formats because sometimes it's a little skewed more towards control and more slower control trap style decks, I guess. And unlike the other mid tiers of Frogs and Trap Tricks and Guru Control, I feel like Altergeist really do have a really solid matchup against all the decks inside the current meta. In addition to that, they can main deck things like Evenly Match whenever they are forced to go second. Because the deck doesn't really have a whole lot of things going second, no, but they're definitely the best at going first. If they don't get outed by Lightning Storm, if they have the responses to, which they do main deck plenty of them, they can really fit and tailor their deck not only to whatever deck they're playing against, but also in things like the mirror match, they typically speaking, this is a value game at that point, and this deck can maintain value pretty well. Personal Smoothing is an insane card. On top of that, they have loops that they can perform. Silicoites, whichever one that bounces is really solid. And then Altergeist Multifaker at 1 hasn't seemed to really hurt the deck all too much. In fact, I couldn't even imagine how powerful this deck would be if Multifaker was at 2 or even 3. That's insane. So I'm going to put that at my number 6 slot, or number 5 slot. Man, these, hey, Yu-Gi-Oh players can't read, and apparently I can't count. So, on to the next one. We have Striker Dragons. So, I actually am putting Striker Dragons at the number 4 slot here inside the tier list as the best decks the format goes, because I feel like it's just the better Dragon Link deck. We talked about Romulus earlier, we talked about the different Dragon Link style decks, and Rocket Link is probably an insane variant of that. A lot of things at their disposal. In addition to that, they can run the Unchained Boss Monster, which can destroy up to 3 cards, not only triggering their own effects, but also clearing their opponent's board as well. A lot of utility, a lot of insane combos, and they can have access to like 3 or 4 or 5 negates off of like 1 to 2 cards. This thing is really consistent, and let's say the thing gets stopped by hand traps, this thing can play through and establish pretty solid boards out the gate. Really, a big sleeper deck for the longest time, but I'm glad people stuck with it. It's a really fun deck to watch. But unfortunately, it's one of those decks that you have to worry about going to time just because the combos take so long to perform. Anyways, though, very solid deck and top tier for sure. Next, controversial opinion. I'm going to be putting Spirals at this one here. Now, Spirals, I think, are a really good deck, and I know a lot of people have saying that they've been bricking recently and that they haven't been doing as good as people have been expecting them to be, but I still think they have the most utility out of all the decks. In addition to that, the Sleeper Apollosa board, or even Sleeper into their Trigate board, is broken. That deck is insane, and they have a lot of options available to them, similar to the Striker Dragon, but also they have the amount of control similar to Altergeist. Well, kind of similar to Altergeist for the most part. Curious combos, Griffin combos, they can really do it all. So you have the Scrap variant, the Pure variant. Magician Souls really did save this deck. And we've also saw the terror of this deck in the Tier 0 format that we had back in 2017. And I remember that October very quick, because we had an emergency ban list, and that was hilarious. But even with drones and quick fix at 1, this deck has still found a way to persist through everything. And I respect it for that. I think it's definitively the top tiers of this format. However, because of the fact that they can brick, because of the fact that everyone was main decking or side decking Drill and Lockbird, this deck has been responded to pretty heftily. Now, if there's no response to this deck and it just goes off, it's pretty hard to beat. But if it does get, it's pretty fragile than that. That's all I got to say about that. So that's going to be it. And one of the best decks of the format is, by far, Shadoked Involved. Invoked Shadolls. That's right. Shadoked Involves is, goddamn, I'm just going to be saying that now. Invoked Shadolls is probably one of the best decks of the format. It is uber consistent. The ability to have Magical Meltdown and to save not only your invocation summons, but also your Shadol summons is absolutely insane. The consistency of this deck to consistently put out boards at Caliga, and Shadol Winda is great. Is so fun. And this deck is actually really fun to play. It's really straightforward. And the funny part about this deck that I didn't really realize until after I was playtesting with it and playing against it is, you know, when you're playing this deck, it really doesn't have to do a whole lot. I almost equate it to the New Age Salamangreats, where it's like they do like one or two things really consistently and pretty easily, but at the same time they're just so powerful and really underestimated for the longest time. I really do like how the new structure deck cards are integrated into this deck really well. They have a lot of recursion of value, and of course sending things off the graveyard, constantly setting up those plays for later. Yes, this deck does get stopped by things like Retaliating Sea or even Dark Law, but for the most part, this deck is pretty solid and has a lot of different utility it can do. In addition to that, it has a lot of summoning mechanics that, a lot of summons it can do to also OTK your opponent, go into Boral Sword super easily, and then after that as well, you can also set up insane negation boards. Now, the negation boards are funny to me, and this is actually one of the interesting things that I've been learning, is that like once your opponent's like clears your board or does a thing, they can just kind of like back off and go into like one Caliga or a Winda, and then you have to like essentially waste your turn to destroy it or get rid of it and then pop off from there. So and given enough time, this deck does snowball pretty well. Now, unfortunately, in the grind game, I'm not quite sure how this deck performs per se, but this deck does have a lot of things at disposal. Cross Shape is great. Alistair is a pretty sweet card, and having Invocation Cycle like that is a pretty solid number one. As far as I'm concerned, this is probably one of the best, if not the best deck of the current format, and that is all. Yes, that's all I got to say about that, honestly. And I don't think I'm really. Oh, hold on. What am I forgetting here? Am I forgetting Heroes? Heroes is one of the best decks of the format. That doesn't make any sense. Hold on. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense. No. Okay. Oh, that just. There we go. Oh, so much better. God tier, baby. That's right. Heroes are back and better than ever. Dark Law, Cross Crusader, Dystopia. A lot of different options this deck has available. Main deck in Nibiru. OTKs, Destiny Hero Plasma. This thing has everything for every occasion. God tier, definitively. Again, for the third format tier list in a row. 3 God tiers. Anyways, that's all I gotta say about it. If you guys like this video, if you guys like this tier list, let me know in the comment section down below. What would you guys change if it? What do you personally think is the best deck of the format? Or potentially, what do you think is the worst deck of the format? I know we have a lot of different bad and high tier and mid tier decks as well that we can go over in addition to the God tier heroes. Anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I'd love to know your thoughts. Personally, this is my list, but I am interested to see what everyone else thinks. But I will see you guys next time. Hopefully, if you guys like this video, make sure to leave a like if you want some more. Please subscribe. Got more videos coming in the pipeline. Stay tuned for that if you'd like to. But yeah, that's all I got to say about it. Peace out.